Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Johnny Bailey, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar for today, The Human Experience of Black People with Disabilities and Their Rights Under the American with Disabilities Act. This is part four of a four-part series, The Power of Visibility and Community Advocacy. We have had a wonderful year of webinars, bringing on renowned speakers and subject matter experts to dive deep on these topics and really unpack the research study that we'll talk more about today. We have two moderators and one director that has really led the charge in making this study and webinar series happen. Again, my name is Johnny Bailey. I am an education consultant for Transcend and the ADA, and very happy to help develop the programming, source the speakers, and provide education platforms for us to share and learn information. I'm also joined today by my colleague Banu, who will tell us more about her right now. Banu.
Thank you, Johnny. Hi, everyone. My name is Bhanupriya Muturu. I am an assistant professor at New Mexico State University. My research focuses on workplace disparities at the intersection of race, gender, culture, and disability. And I'm thrilled to be part of this important discussion today. I am an Indian woman with long dark hair, and I'm wearing a light brown blazer today. I'm smiling and excited to be here. I do want to acknowledge that as an Indian international, I do not carry the lived experiences of being Black and disabled in the US. So I do come to this conversation as a learner and a facilitator with respect for leaders like Elizabeth, whose voices we are centering today.
Thank you, Banu. We also have the director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA today, Miss Anne Deschamps.
Hi, Johnny. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Power of Visibility and Community Advocacy, part four in this webinar series. If you haven't seen the other three parts, I encourage you to go to our website and check out the archived versions. I am also super excited today to hear from Elizabeth Booker Houston, who definitely knows all about the power of visibility and community advocacy. I will let Johnny and Banu and Elizabeth take over in just a second. But before I do, I would like to tell you how committed we are here at the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center to educating people, all people with disabilities, about their rights under the ADA. This project in particular has been so important to me personally and professionally. It has resulted in so many rich resources, collaborations, and exciting outcomes that I'm looking forward to continuing this work long after today's webinar is over. With that said, I'm going to turn everything over back to you, Johnny. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. And as you said, last but certainly not least, we have our guest speaker, Miss Elizabeth Booker Houston, who is a multifaceted individual with a very diverse background in law, public health, and comedy. So really interested to hear from you today, Elizabeth, and I would love for you to come on now and share a little bit more color about your background.
Sure. Thank you so much, Johnny, and everyone just for having me here today. I'm very excited. So yes, I have a background in law as well as public health. I've worked as a social scientist as well, and I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and now live and work in the Washington, D.C. area. I worked for almost a decade in the Department of Health and Human Services over the course of about over about four different operating divisions. So CDC, the Administration for Children and Families, the NIH, and then most recently the FDA. And I am now a full-time political creator and commentator, and also a comedian, where I post on social media as well as do in-person engagement to basically try to break down what's going on. um, I am not solely a disability advocate, but the conversation around disability and disability rights often permeates the work that I do, because I myself have disabilities, and have dealt with a lot of health issues since I was about 2 years old. And also, as I've publicly talked about on my platform recently, I have a son who is autistic, and I have been speaking out about a lot of the misinformation and disinformation surrounding autism and autistic individuals and also their rights. But I pretty much give a little bit of everything on my platform. It is not always safe for work. I do have colorful language on there, so I always warn people who have not seen my content, don't have the volume all the way up because again, I am a comedian who was greatly influenced by the kings and queens of comedy. So yeah.
I love that. And I actually do enjoy your social media rants and content. So encourage those who are interested to check out Elizabeth's social. Um, let's dive into today's agenda. We'll start with Banu will cover the study and knowing your rights under the ADA and why this study was so important. Then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of this conversation around the power of visibility and advocacy and allow Elizabeth to really share some tips, strategies, and insights around how we can also elevate our voice and leverage visibility to catalyze growth and change in society or in our local communities. Then at the end, we will ask you all to complete a webinar survey, which is really important to ensure that we are delivering information that's relevant and timely for you and also gives you an opportunity to let us know what you would like to see more of in the future. And then we'll open up the floor for an audience Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop those questions in the chat throughout the presentation. And at the end, we will have a time for you to ask those questions, moderated by Banu and myself. So without further ado, if everyone's ready, I would love for you in the chat right now to let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I would love to know what part of the world are you viewing from? See, Knoxville, Cincinnati, Ohio, Baltimore, Missouri. Well, they're coming in fast. Connecticut, Michigan, Tucson. I see some DC out there. Florida. Did I see a Canada? Incredible. This so inspiring to see folks from all over the country here to learn and get this information. And I think it's powerful that we're able to connect and leverage these strategies at a national level. You all continue to type in where you're tuning in from, but Banu, I'm gonna turn it over to you for this first section around understanding your rights under the ADA and why this study came about.
Thank you, Johnny. Uh, Before we turn to Elizabeth, I would like to briefly share some findings from the study which we did in collaboration with University of Maryland, New Mexico State University, and Mid-Atlantic ADA Center on Black individuals with disabilities and their rights under the ADA. Nearly 35 years after the passage of ADA, Black individuals with disabilities continue to experience one of the starkest disparities in education, health, employment, and employment rates remain around 25% unemployment rates, and poverty is around 37% among the highest of all racial groups. And this study, we wanted to explore the barriers Black individuals with disabilities faced in understanding and exercising their rights and the strategies they use to overcome some of those barriers. We conducted 4 focus groups with 50 participants and identified 7 major themes. Although I would not go into detail on each of the themes, the study results are available on Mid-Atlantic ADA Center as briefs for you to access. I will briefly mention the themes and how the research study ties into today's webinar. So, understanding and accessing rights was one of the themes. Many participants knew their rights, but also felt that their rights were not being honored or enforced. Sources of information is something that people talked about a lot, where they either had to self educate or rely on advocacy groups because information was not accessible in their communities. Social media was one of the sources in which people were learning a lot of information from, and advocacy organizations were the other source of information primarily. Identity and belonging is another theme participants mentioned, where they were navigating intersectional identities like race, disability, and sometimes gender together, creating complex identity struggles in navigating a disability. Discrimination and marginalization was a theme which participants highlighted as something that compounded their barriers across work, healthcare, and education. In the midst of racism, ableism, and intersectional discrimination, participants also highlighted the ongoing need for advocacy and visibility, where they described disability rights and fighting for disability rights as a continuous fight requiring both individual and collective advocacy. So these findings are what led us to create this four-part webinar series, of which today's session, Elizabeth, is a part. Each session focuses on a theme that participants told us was most urgent, with increasing visibility and community advocacy at the center of this webinar. So with that in mind, I would like to begin our conversation with our first question for Elizabeth. Uh, so, Elizabeth, you mentioned about having a disability, and I'm in your experience, how did the intersection of your race and disability shape the barriers you encountered, including whether you felt safe disclosing your disability, and I think how did those intersecting identities influence your ability to seek accommodation, support, or
So to answer your question, honestly, race played into my experience from the very beginning, and how I was treated. I was 2 years old when I was first diagnosed with the host of health issues that I have. And my mom has told me a story about how when we were in the emergency room one night and seeking treatment, there were doctors coming around. This is a hospital, children's hospital in Memphis. The majority, if not all of the children, including myself, are on Medicaid, TennCare, which is Tennessee's version of Medicaid. I believe every child in that room was Black or a child of color. And this doctor came around and just said, oh, they all need some kind of shot, without really evaluating, like just going to give every child the same injection. And my mom had to stand up against him and say, no, we're not doing that. You don't know what's going on with her or any of these kids. And you can't just come around and say, oh, this is what they all need. And she pushed back really hard. And that was, I think, my first experience with medical racism, and especially when it comes to dealing with disability as a Black person. And so that was kind of the first instance that I know my mom has told me about. And as I've gotten older, you know, it seems that it's been harder sometimes to access accommodations, um, simply because people have their preconceived notions and their biases when it comes to Black people. And this concept that unfortunately is always in our society about Black people being lazy, right? So when we see conversations about Black people being welfare queens, the welfare queen trope, all of that sort of thing. And when you try to seek any sort of accommodation, it almost feels, well, I think it is about 10 times harder, simply because rather than look at what you actually need, there is this assumption of what you deserve. And they don't really balance well. And for me, in my personal experience, and I've talked to so many other Black women, especially who have disabilities, who are overachievers, right? It feels like we're always trying to prove ourselves. I have to be extra and be the best and the best and the best. And even in law school, I remember I had a particularly bad round of asthma attacks. And rather than taking the time and the leave to rest, I was lugging around my nebulizer to the classes and my moot court competition practices and all of that. And literally getting up and competing and then going in the back to get on my breathing machine, right after. And I was just going and going and going until finally we got to the end of a competition I was running, and I ended up in the hospital because I was just pushing myself and pushing myself and pushing myself because of this idea of not being worthy of rest or accommodations. And so I've really, over the last 10 years or so, since, I started when I first went into law school, trying to understand that I am worthy of accommodations. And just because society might push back and say I'm not deserving, that doesn't make that true. And trying to get that messaging out to other Black disabled folks who are made to feel less than because they're simply asking for something that makes things more equitable. And equity should be something we're always striving for.
Such an important piece that you are sharing, right? Thank you for sharing the experience. And it's so hard to ask for something to be at an equitable pace. And sometimes, yeah, you push yourself to get do as much as you can until you can no longer do something. So it's you mentioned about the misconceptions, right, and how they contribute to Black women or Black individuals with disabilities working much more harder to uh, not be seen as the misconception or the stereotype. So, what are some most common misconceptions about the ADA and or about individuals with disabilities seeking accommodations that you have seen, especially on social media?
Yeah. So some of the biggest stereotypes and misconceptions that I have seen are that um, it's really surrounding the concept of whether this is an undue burden. That comes up so much. Undue burden, which if folks are not familiar, is the concept of if you have an employer, education setting, et cetera, that is providing disability accommodations, it could not be an unreasonable or undue burden on the institution providing the accommodations, right? The reasonableness encompasses so much. And I often see individuals say things like, well, I don't want to ask for this because I think they're just going to say no because it's a burden on my employer. And I'm like, inconvenient is not the same as an undue burden. Just because it might be a little inconvenient for your team members to have to join on a Zoom call when maybe they'd rather meet in person doesn't mean that allowing you to telework on days that you have your treatment or or whatever you have your therapies, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that accommodation is going to be considered an undue burden or not something that you can get access to just because it might be a little more inconvenient for your employer to invest in a standing desk because of your back issues, right? Doesn't mean that that's going to be an undue burden because it might cost a little more money to put that in. And I see that over and over again with individuals. Again, it just goes back to that whole stereotype of feeling not deserving of something. And instead of looking at the burden that is placed upon the individual, being so concerned with the burden on quite often these giant institutions that can't afford to be a little inconvenienced in order to provide accessibility to the people who work there or who learn there or what have you.
Yeah, it's not understanding that in some way the systems are creating the inequities. So asking for an accommodation is not necessarily placing undue burden, but is asking to give an equitable space to do the things that other people are more easily doing it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, from a public health perspective, Elizabeth, how does the lack of visibility for Black individuals with disabilities perpetuate the systemic disparities that in access to care? And how do you think personal storytelling can support awareness of or increase visibility?
Yeah. From a public health perspective, and folks always want to reduce everything to money. Um, that's what unfortunately in this the way that capitalism is set up. You look at what people can do in the output and what money they can make for someone. This is a comparison I often give about neurodivergence. Everybody wants a gifted child, but people are afraid of having autistic children. And I always bring that up because gifted children are seen as a benefit to capitalism and what they can generate, and autistic children are seen as a burden because of the accommodations they may need. But it's still in that spectrum in that class of neurodivergence. And it's this idea of there only being one way for someone to be of value to society. And so we are overlooking in the worst way, just the skills and talents and unique things that individuals can bring given their own abilities. And especially when those abilities are coupled with accommodations for their disabilities, right? We're overlooking what those individuals can bring, and what new things we might have in society if we were just to accommodate these individuals. You have no idea what they could do. It's extremely frustrating to hear from people who, as children, didn't get what they needed, but as adults, as soon as they were able to finally fight for accommodations, are now able to be a part of society. And I don't mean just in a monetary way, but just to be a part of society and a community in a way that is extremely meaningful because now they have the access to do so, right? And that's where storytelling comes in and being so important, is for people to talk about how specific accommodations have allowed them to be a community member, to be a part of society, and to be active in society. And that really just humanizes everything. Because again, folks want to reduce it to money. What is this costing us? Is this really worthwhile? And at the end of the day, accommodations are better for public health as a whole, and it puts less of a strain on our public health system, right? But if you have that storytelling aspect, it just really brings people in to humanize what is going on. I they have there's a creator who I followed for some time who is in a wheelchair, and she shares her story as a mother and the ways that she has used accommodations to be able to care for her children and be a part of her children's lives, and also be able to, make sure that her children are able to go do the things they want to do, school, sports, etc. And that very human storytelling component is so important for people to get that empathy and really understand why accommodations are important, because you're not just looking at a wheelchair user, you're looking at a mom and a wife. You're looking at a woman who is caring for her kids and making sure that they are getting to school and to soccer and to everything else that they do. And that, when you just bring that human component into everything, it makes it a lot harder to be judgmental, right? It makes it a lot harder to just write people off.
It humanizes the experience and it helps us connect with the people experiencing something. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's really good. I want to continue to progress through to our next section around self-expression. And I think that's the perfect segue when you think about the talents and gifts that we all possess. And some folks just don't get the resources to fully express. And in our study, many participants did discuss that they learned about the ADA and other relevant topics through social media. So I want to ask, as someone who uses both a pretty sharp legal analysis along with comedic satire in your content. If I'm a content creator or I have a social platform that I maybe aspire to grow, what advice can you give someone on kind of balancing that emotional weight of personal narrative and then um, keeping that strategic goal of policy change?
Well, the first tip that I have is a very kind of a loosey goosey concept, and that is to pay attention to how you feel when you're making and putting out certain content. Because for at the beginning and for a while, sometimes you're putting out content and nobody's really seeing it. You're not getting the feedback you want, and you can get burnout so quickly if you start putting out things because you think, well, this is the right strategy, but you're not feeling it, right? Like it's not vibing with you. You're going to get burnt out. And as long as you're putting out content that you love and you enjoy, that's going to help with the consistency and the ability to be able to find that balance and find your voice, and just to keep generating the content until you reach the audience you're trying to reach, or reach the goal that you're trying to reach with your content. um, and I think about that, there's a lot of videos and content I put out that doesn't go viral or doesn't get as many views as other things, but I feel really, really good about it. And even if it's not going viral, it's really cool just to get a handful of comments or messages from somebody who said, I saw this and I loved it. And that's amazing to me, right? That's the goal, is to try to reach people where they are for me. And you just have to think about that. Like, what is your goal? If I don't feel, I'm having like a whole mental block, creative block, and I don't feel like talking about something, I don't do it because it's not going to turn out well. And this is where the collaboration aspect of content creation comes in. I know it's an important topic and people need to hear it, but I don't have the capacity or the bandwidth or the interest, or I don't feel like maybe I have the skill, but I know a creator who does, and I know they've put something out. And that's when I do a lot of collaborative posts, or I post someone else's content with, of course, crediting them for their work and tagging them, or share to my stories or repost. And that's another thing too that people forget is that content creation isn't just about what you yourself are creating, putting out, but also how you collaborate and amplify. And
Mm.
that also just takes a really big weight off your shoulders to not feel like it's always on you to speak on everything or cover everything. And so I think just that's the most important thing if you're getting into content creation is early on to find the interest and the balance to be able to be consistent and not get burnout.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I feel like people have to delineate between the creator and the curator.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also really powerful curators that maybe they themselves are not always creating the video, but they're creating a hub for relevant topics to be discussed. And they're pulling in the best and the brightest people to a platform to share information. And I think that's really another skill that can be leveraged in our community. So I really like that. But to take it back in your story a little bit, can you talk about like where you got started on social media? Like when did you start and like what was it like for you to say like I had this video, maybe no one saw it, but you put it out and it felt good or didn't feel
So
good?
I started off with, like a lot of people, it was COVID, it was lockdown, and I discovered TikTok, which is funny because I never post on TikTok anymore. I've switched to other platforms, but that's where I started. And I just started doing the funny trends and videos, and it was for the like 30 or 40 friends and family members where we followed each other, right? That's who it was for. And then I made this joke video about grief. I do a lot of dark humor. I lost my brother in 2017 to gun violence. And yeah, I did this trend where people were rating their siblings. And I have four siblings. I have three sisters and then my brother. And I went through my three sisters and I gave them silly ratings. And I got to my brother and I was like, he's cool or whatever, but he up and died one time. So 4 out of 10. Like, like it was a very dark kind of joke. But it resonated with so many people. And then the video took off, and other people who had lost siblings or family members or loved ones were commenting and saying, like, not everyone gets it, but this is the kind of humor that was resonating with people. And then as the pandemic kept going and I had made some jokey videos and silly things and gotten a bit of a following, it just so happens that my specialty is public health law, and I had been trained at the CDC's public health law program in the law of like epidemics, pandemics, quarantine, isolation, all these things. I had just switched to a privacy law focus because I didn't think my area was going to be relevant. And then a global pandemic happened. So that was a bit of irony there. But I was also newly postpartum when all this was going on. I was 3 months postpartum when everything shut down, and so kind of like balancing being a new mom in isolation with just my son and my husband. So that kind of reaching out on that human connect, but also wanting to give people information because I had so many people reach out and they said, oh, I've been an attorney for 20, 30 years, but you're the Memphis grad who I heard has the specialty in public health law. How does this work? And um, suddenly became somebody with a very niche set of knowledge that was extremely necessary at the time. And so I would, excuse me, I would talk to these lawyers and these different scientists and talk about what I knew. And then I just thought, oh, but you know what? I could do this on social media and get this to more people. So I started explaining things like how emergency use authorizations work for vaccines, and also really fighting against anti-vax rhetoric, which vaccinations are so important in the disability community for those of us who have had immunodeficiencies, chronic illness, different disabilities. It's extremely important to have that herd immunity, right? To keep keep our most vulnerable safe. And so vaccines have been something I've talked about for a very long time, and the safety and efficacy of vaccines, especially as someone who was working at the FDA. And so I did a lot of content to explain things to people in a way that just wasn't using jargon, not big terms, but so that like a regular person could just understand and wouldn't need a science background. And I had so many people tell me they got vaccinated because of my videos. And that
Mm.
was like, I think the first moment where I realized, oh, there's a really important impact that this social media content can have on behavior change, which as a social scientist who worked in
Mhm.
behavior change, I love that. So
There was a
yeah.
power in visibility.
Yes, yes.
That's incredible. Wow, that's a powerful story. I love those origin stories because now I see you on social and you're just like 600,000 plus and you're growing every day and you're getting noticed by all types of people, right? At all levels of society and for better or worse. And that makes me wonder, and I think about even the activists of our past who are extremely brave and courageous in speaking truth to power and educating people on things that maybe power does not want people to know. So, how do you, where do you get that courage from? And what do you think about cancel culture? How do you advise other creators or people who want to self-express to kind of manage like the inevitable legal or personal risk, but also be able to really speak that truth and be a light for the people that need it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I never begrudge other creators or people for not addressing things or doing things the way that I do. I think that it's really easy to judge. It's very easy to point a finger and say you need to be talking about this, but I think everybody needs to understand their circumstances and understand privilege and risk. I have a lot of privilege for the area that I live in, which is just politically, which also gives me access to the Hill and lawmakers and the work that I do. I also now work for myself. As you said, cancel culture. There's a group who was not very happy about some statements that I made, and they had been trying to cancel me and have me resign this past week from a job that I don't have. And they've been boycotting my company that I don't have because they don't really know what I do. They just saw a very quick clip and made an assumption and went off. And I have that ability to speak in a more free way than others do because I do work for myself, because of the financial privilege, because of the privilege of, I mean, I live in a multi-generational house. My aunt lives with me, helps with childcare. There's all kinds of things that make it so that I'm able to do things in a way that would be riskier for other people, right? And I think that's perfectly reasonable for everybody to figure out what can they risk, what privilege do they have or not have, and move in that way. I talk about this in all kinds of things when it comes to social justice, and again, not every creator can put their full name out there and say this is who I am and this is what I do, and not risk their livelihood and feeding their kids and their families, and that's totally understandable. The same thing goes with people in boycotts. That's disability often gets overlooked in conversation about boycotts, which I support. um, I absolutely engage in and support in boycotts, but I don't shame other people who can't, because let's be real, there's some companies that people can't boycott because they need access to certain things, and that's the society we live in. So I always say boycott where you can, and give that impact where you can. So it's very kind of people when they say I'm being courageous or being brave, but I do also like to balance that with saying I'm not I'm only as brave as the privileges and access that I have. And, maybe if I lived somewhere different or my financial situation were different, maybe I wouldn't be able to speak as freely. And it's not to say I'm not proud of the work I do or that I don't stand behind everything I say. I just like to put that caveat out there because it's very easy to start getting into a weird comparison of like, am I doing the right thing, or this person isn't doing it this way, so they're not, we're all making an impact. And when we're moving toward a shared goal, and again, as a mom, I always think about like the mom shaming thing of like, oh, the mom who can do it all. And I'm like, you see like people on social media and you're just seeing a snapshot, and again, you're not seeing the privilege that makes some of that happen. So even as a Black disabled woman, who I may not, I know I don't have the same privilege and access as, say, the white able-bodied men, or I would say non-disabled men who work in the same political creator space as myself. That I do still have more access and privilege than, say, others who don't have some of the things that I've been fortunate to have. So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. I always have a hard time like explaining that because I want people to understand that it definitely just depends from creator to creator, and I don't want anybody to ever feel ashamed because they
Mm,
can't do something the same way.
for sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. Banu?
Yeah. And it's so helpful to hear what you're sharing too, Elizabeth. It's saying that everyone has like their own privilege and marginalization, and where we come from impacts how we show up. And it can be something to do with courage, but it is also something to do with the privilege we hold and how much we can talk about something. So and also the innate worth that you're talking about, like we are worthy in what we are doing, irrespective of how much we do, and it's everything that we do is important to someone. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for making that powerful. Sharing that piece, Elizabeth. So you mentioned earlier about collaborations and finding community. Online to talk about issues when you are not feeling up for generating content yourself. So, what role do you see coalition work like between different creators, but also between different groups and organizations? What role do you see that kind of community-based coalition work play in supporting Black individuals with disabilities? And where do you see the most collaboration being needed?
Yeah, well, we have our, just as a creator, that community. Is kind of the first little section of us as individuals. But when it comes to our relationship with organizations, um, the organizations definitely in the work that I do specifically have a responsibility to understand um, when you put a Black, disabled woman at the forefront of your content and that political work, there's more risk. Um, and that needs to be understood. That needs to be addressed. And that is an ongoing conversation that I have with these orgs. And I'm very proud to say that I have a lot of organizations I partnered with who agree. And they work very hard to not pay equally, but equitably, especially to Black creators and Black disabled creators. Um, and when it comes to uplifting and amplifying voices, I think it is extremely important to not just go by platform size. There are micro influencers, smaller creators who have a really important story to tell. I very often collab with creators who are smaller than myself as far as platform size. I encourage organizations to also reach out to those creators and don't dismiss them just because they have a smaller following. Because when it comes to impact and engagement, and again, going back to that behavior change that I talk about, there are some people who might have 20,000 followers who, with their story and their subject matter, can have a bigger impact than someone who has 500,000. Um, and it's also just about not diminishing those voices simply based on follower count. Uh, I feel like that follower number, and I'm very proud of how my platforms have grown, but that follower number is also a new form of inequity in that organizations will just write off creators who don't hit a certain threshold, and you're missing the opportunity to really get a unique and important voice in there, and also to help somebody grow, because it's better if there's more of us in there, right? Like talking about these things and doing this work. And so I just really encourage organizations and other creators to not just think, oh, let me, make sure I link up with the people who have, 1 million followers. That's not the way to go about it.
Yeah. It's like in research, people talked about generalizability a lot previously, and you were like, oh, quantitative results. Like, is this generalizable to everyone? And then right now, there's this, or in the past few years, we talked about stories and qualitative analysis and putting faces to things. And good research is something that may not be generalizable because some people and cultures, it's not generalizable to everyone. So it's very important that we amplify stories that are specific to a certain population. So it feels similar as you're talking about that.
Can you tell that I worked a lot in qualitative research?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, yes, definitely, because it's a because we can't quantify or generalize research to everyone, because
Right.
culture plays an important role. So you talked about collaboration. So when you do like forge collaborations and alliances, are there any legal or ethical due diligence that you do before you are linking your personal advocacy to a larger organization or a political campaign? Like in terms of, and how do you go about doing that? And what suggestions do you have for people who are looking for collaborators in that way?
I just make sure to look really deeply at their websites, their content, what they're putting out. I also will Google name controversy. And everybody's got controversy. But sometimes the controversy is exactly what I want because they're angering the people I want to, anger. So not saying that they don't have controversy. Just make sure they're on the side of the controversy that aligns with you because it gets very messy. And making sure that you are just doing something that aligns with your goals and values. Um, I don't just take any contract at all. I'm very particular about what I do because it has to make sure to align with my values. And sometimes I started working on something for orgs and they kind of change things halfway and I go, okay, we can cancel the contract because this isn't going the way that I want it to. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up. And don't let them kind of control your platform. I always say you're trying to get real estate on my platform. So I'm not going to allow myself to be bulldozed by an organization and told to say something that doesn't match my voice. Um, eh, I hate scripting for sponsored content, but sometimes they really need scripts. That's fine. It's a script that I wrote. I'm never going to read something that somebody else drafted. They can give me feedback and say, oh, well, try this, but you're not going to write things for me to just spew out. And so I think that's really important for folks to understand so that you keep that power of your voice and the power of your platform and don't let anybody else run you over.
So I want to take a next step into action through community advocacy and not to be too redundant, but want to try to diversify and maybe get a little bit more actionable on these questions. So thinking about the different approaches, that folks can take in community advocacy, whether it's grassroots organizing to online campaigns. Um, if you were thinking about some things that are relevant in today's society with the intersection of disability, race, and ethnicity, what are some, what is a policy or law that you would propose to really help provide more equity for people today?
Oh my gosh. Everybody should be entitled to healthcare, food, and housing. That's just it. I mean, just really, there's no reason. We had all this discussion about food stamps recently, and I'm just like, everybody should get food stamps. Everybody. Why is food it's a right, and
Mm-hmm.
healthcare again. I mean, really, if everybody had healthcare, if I could just wave a wand and, get those three things solidified into saying this is what people have a right to, I feel like that would solve so many of our problems.
Mm-hmm. We're in such a I feel like we're back in a time of uncertainty yet again. Like I thought during the pandemic, we were obviously there's so much uncertainty and political and just societal uncertainty. And I thought we were beyond that. And we found ourselves back in this time of people losing jobs and economic uncertainty, and folks are saying recessions and things like that. So it is particularly difficult for just basic needs to be met.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Um, so thinking about strategy, and I want to ask this question because I know that we have stakeholders from all different areas of the disability community here. And I imagine that there are some folks that are aspirational and change makers, or maybe already doing the work as an advocate or an activist of some sort. And they can learn from you and how you position your work. So I want to ask, what are the key differences in strategy when advocating for change in maybe like a local ADA implementation versus advocating for a federal policy change? How do you see the difference in that, and how do you like leverage your physical presence versus online?
Oh, local change is something we've got to focus heavily on. It's easier to do. It has an impact on your local community. And that's not to say we forget about going at things at the federal level, but really focusing on things at the local level. And the more that you start to see that pop up locally, the more pressure it puts on the federal level to say,
Mm.
okay, all right, I guess we've got to do something here. Um, and to really advocate for that. And so I personally, with my platform, I don't just talk about federal stuff. I will talk about things with local communities. I try to be respectful um, for the communities I am not a part of or have not been a part of. So I speak very candidly about Memphis because that's my hometown and I talk a lot about that. I talk a lot about things here in the DC area because I live here and I'm a resident. But I try to, rather than just, it's a weird combination. So people scroll on my platform and they stop and videos go viral because they see my face, right? And so because that's what they've been used to seeing. If I put somebody else there, it won't always work. But I don't want to just co-opt what somebody else is doing or steamroll over them. So oftentimes what I'll do is talk to the local orgs and communities there, figure out what it is they want and their goals are. And then that's what I put out there to the audience to almost be like a vehicle for their message. And again, it's not like somebody like dictating exactly what I say or scripting for me or what have you. I'm still using my words and my methods to get that across, and I'm also saying things that align with my values, but I'm just following the lead of somebody who knows better, if that makes sense, right? If I go, for example, to a community and I say, "Hey, I heard you guys are, probably in need of, I don't know, I'll make something up. I hear that you're in need of mobility aids. That's what I heard that you guys need." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, one reporter reported on that and it kind of went all over the country. But actually, that's not what we need. We don't need mobility aids. We actually need transportation services to therapy." Like something like that, right? It's knowing the difference between just going off of like what you see in headlines and all of that and actually engaging with the local community and finding out, oh, that was just one thing that was said one time and there's a misrepresentation now in the media for people who don't actually live and work and understand what's happening here. You're telling me what you actually need. That's going to be the thing that I say in my video. So I hope that makes sense.
That's really good. And I'm going to push forward a little bit as we are coming close on time. Banu, do you have one question for future vision before we transition to the Q&A?
Um, I think quickly I will ask you in terms of generative AI and algorithmic bias that is coming up. So how might gaps in digital accessibility or algorithmic biases like create new barriers, and how do you go about addressing some of those barriers for individuals with disabilities and especially Black people with disabilities? Yeah.
And what are your concerns, if any?
Mhm.
I have many concerns. AI is getting very good. It is very hard to tell what's real and what's fake. I am very concerned about how this is particularly being used to create AI of Black creators and Black people, and also, again, to make up situations and videos to perpetuate those stereotypes we talked about earlier that disproportionately impact Black disabled people. And so we've got to be loud about AI regulation. That's kind of my quick answer there. We have to be loud about AI being regulated because I am very afraid of the rhetoric that will come from fake videos and images.
Short and sweet. Thank you for that answer. AI is a conversation that we can go on about and probably should continue to talk about for the foreseeable future, but that will be a convo for another webinar. At this point, we have now concluded our meat and potatoes session of the power of visibility, and we want to transition to a few things before we let you all sign off. One, I'm going to ask you to complete a quick survey on today's conversation, letting us know how we did, what you'd like to see more of, and we can bring that to you. Then we'll have a Q&A with Elizabeth, so stay tuned for that. If you have questions and I see some in the chat, definitely stand by. And then we'll close out with a few resources that are really timely for you all as you go into your visibility and advocacy journey. So I'll leave you with this QR code on screen. There's also a link if you would like to type that in. And I will ask my colleagues at ADA, Emily or Maynard, are you able to drop the survey link in the chat, please? Give you all a few minutes to do this. I would love for us to see 25% of our attendees today, which would probably be somewhere around 50 to 75 people that complete our survey. That'd be fantastic. So the link is now in the chat. The QR code is visible on screen if you would like to scan with your mobile device. Give you all about a few seconds to take care of that. You also can screenshot this and press and hold on your device to then open up a new tab. Great. So let's move into our Q&A. We probably have time for about 2 or 3 questions from our audience. And I'm seeing a few in the chat. I'll just jump in with the first one that I see, and I'll try to scroll up to ask a few others. This question says, and I'm going to guess that these questions are for Elizabeth. What do you suggest when an IEP team keeps trying to say a student has ADHD instead of high functioning autism?
Um, well, me being the assertive person I am, I would say you don't have the authority to diagnose. That is not your job. Please stay in your lane. This is a legal document that we are drafting, and legally, you have to go by what their diagnosis is. And that's it. That's the long and the short of it. If we can't find a way to move forward correctly, we can go ahead and bring the school board into this conversation.
Short and
Sure.
sweet. So, Bonnie, you gonna jump in on some of these, or will you
Sure.
want me? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
One of the questions was, can you speak on how healthcare providers may reinforce the idea that Black people's pain is less credible? And what are some practical strategies for disrupting those patterns?
Yeah, this is a big problem. We saw some research, if I'm not mistaken, was it back in maybe 2022 that showed that roughly half of medical students in the US believed that Black people had a higher pain tolerance than white people. So that was a very scary statistic to see. And we're seeing now with the Black woman who was turned away while she was in active labor at the hospital and gave birth in the car, which I believe there was a congresswoman, and I don't know why I'm not remembering who it was at this moment, who was trying to pass a law in response to how that happened. The best thing that we can do is at any time that you can have someone advocate for you there in the hospital. Bring someone with you who can advocate for you. Don't go alone to hospital, urgent care, medical appointment, what have you, so that you have somebody there who can push back. And I know that's not the most perfect answer because we don't always have that resource, but even if you could like FaceTime somebody on your phone and have them pulled up while you're there speaking to the medical professional, that can often help because it feels like there's a set of eyes on them. And unfortunate that we have to do that, but
Yeah. Thank you for that. I have questions coming in, so I'm going to ask one more question. Do you think class and education play a role in terms of access to accommodations?
Absolutely. I get away with a lot of pulling out that health lawyer card, and it shouldn't be that way. Um, it should not be that way. And I still have dealt with, medical racism and racist responses in seeking accommodations, but being able to pull out the lawyer card, it helps. It shouldn't be necessary. It shouldn't take that. People should just be treated like human beings. And so I do absolutely think that class and education play into it. People have these preconceived notions, and sometimes doesn't even matter about your class and education, as we see with cases of Black women who are still not given proper care, or Black disabled people who are not given accommodations because the racism is just so strong in that scenario. So it's definitely something that they play against each other, and they're interconnected. And it goes a lot back to those stereotypes that I talked about earlier in the webinar.
We have a few other questions, but unfortunately, we will not be able to get to those as we are running really, really close on time. Um, I encourage you all to stay connected to Elizabeth. Let everyone know how they can find you online or anything you'd like to plug in for future connection.
Yeah, I am. You can Google Elizabeth Booker Houston, and all the things will come up, including the controversy of the people I've recently angered, which might be entertaining to some people. And you can find me on all social media platforms at Booker Squared. It's BOOKERSQUARED. And that is a play on my maiden name, which was Elizabeth Booker Booker. I had the same middle name and last name. People always ask where that handle came from. So I always share that that's why I'm Elizabeth Booker Houston, because I'm married now, but I was Elizabeth Booker Booker.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very insightful. You're someone who I met maybe a year or two ago, and I've been following you since. So it's really great that we get to work together today.
Thank you all for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And this was really great.
Awesome. So, Anne, if you want to rejoin us really quick to speak to our two new resources that we've released on the ADA Mid-Atlantic website.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I'll be brief. And thank you so much, Elizabeth. We have two new resources on our website, The Intersectionality of Race and Disability, a scholarly research bibliography about research related to the intersection of race and disability, and then a wonderful disability history timeline for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, both on our research page on our website. Thanks again to Banu, Johnny, and most of all, Elizabeth, thank you for all the work you do and your contributions today. It's fabulous discussion.
Thank you
Wonderful.
again.
If you all are looking to get in touch with the ADA in any of these regions, I know we have folks from all over the country here
Yes.
today. You can find your region here and you can contact the ADA National Network using this number here, 1-800-949-4232, or you can reach the ADA online at adata.org. And lastly, just want to thank you all for joining us. As we mentioned before, this is our part four of our four-part series. Um, what a journey it's been. It's almost bittersweet to see that we are ending this version of it, but hopefully we can run this back and bring you all some more valuable content and subject matter experts to speak more about topics that matter to you. In the survey, let us know that you'd like to see this again. That can really help us advocate and find the resources to continue to do these type of webinars for you. If you'd like to contact the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, you have the number here. If you are in Delaware, DC, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, or West Virginia, that applies to you. You can call this number 800-949-4232 or use your local number here at 301-217-0124. Thank you all for joining us. Be well, be safe, and be inspired. See you next time.